technical issues, and we'll start in a couple of minutes. Just wait. All right. So let us start. I just heard that we are live on YouTube. So greetings to all of you here in Bolívar House and to everyone at home or wherever you may be. I am Héctor Hoyos. I'm the new director of the Center for Latin American Studies, and it is my great pleasure to give an introduction, more an informal introduction, a welcome, una bienvenida muy cordial a todas, a todos, a todes, a este espacio. Vamos a hablar más que todo en inglés, but I hear we're also going to speak a little bit in Spanish. We're going to be code switching. And to introduce our distinguished guests who have already graced Bolívar House with beautiful pictures from their work and who have visited the Stanford Libraries. I just heard earlier this morning, we're going to have none other than Elizabeth Sáenz-Ackerman, Associate Director of the Center for Latin American Studies. Elizabeth.
Thank you, Mr. Hoyos. Good morning, afternoon, evening, and welcome everyone. Buenos días, tardes, noches, y bienvenidos, bienvenidas, bienvenidos. I'm Elizabeth Sáenz-Ackerman, as Professor Hoyos mentioned. I'm the Associate Director here at the Center for Latin American Studies. Soy Elizabeth Sáenz-Ackerman, directora asociada del Centro de Estudios Latinoamericanos de la Universidad de Stanford. And I will be speaking mostly in English to save some time. Una disculpa, voy a hablar principalmente en inglés para ahorrar un poco de tiempo. So on behalf of class, it is my honor to welcome you to the first class event of the year 2024, a window to the Zapatista movement, 40 and 30 years of organizing. I am delighted and humbled to present today's event. Es un evento sencillo that intends to, in a small way, acknowledge the decades of the Maya indigenous peoples of Chiapas organizing at all levels, including socially, politically, and economically, while inspiring peoples across the globe to imagine and realize their own destinies on their own geographies. I proceed now to introduce our speakers, Professor Sylvia Marcos and Margara Millán, and photographer Yuridia Pantoja Millán. To those of you present here, we invite you to stay after the seminar for a viewing of the photograph exhibit entitled Una Ventana al Zapatismo. Our guests today will briefly illustrate from their perspective the Zapatista struggle, with emphasis on the role of Maya indigenous women in the Zapatista movement. Professor Sylvia Marcos is a scholar committed to indigenous movements throughout the Americas. As a university professor and researcher, she has proposed a new vision in the field of feminist critical epistemology, Mesoamerican religions, and women within indigenous movements, while promoting an anti-hegemonic feminist practice, theory, and hermeneutics. Apologies. Dr. Marcos has accompanied the Zapatista movement since shortly before its public appearance. She finds in their insurgency the contemporary incarnation of what she has studied about the Mesoamerican episteme, and views the Zapatista political proposal as a living horizon. Professor Marcos' presentation is titled Una poética de la insurgencia zapatista. Text that our MA students here have already read, and Professor Marcos asked me encarecidamente que resaltara the collection Alfaro Zapatista. Si aún no está, pondremos en la página del evento los enlaces correspondientes para que ustedes puedan accesarlos fácilmente. And we will also include the link to the archival documents from the ECLN, which are open access on the Enlace Zapatista website for scholars and the general public to consult from primary sources. Professor Margara Millán, who is here with us today in person, is a sociologist and social anthropologist and professor at the Department of Political and Social Sciences at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. Her research focuses on gender representations in social movements, critique of modernity, and decolonial feminisms. Dr. Millán participates in the network of decolonial feminisms in Mexico and in the collective Llegó la hora de los pueblos. Her talk is titled 30 años del mundo zapatista. And finally, Yuridia Pantoja Millán is a photographer and graphic designer, lover of books and graphics inspired by the Zapatista movement. She has had the opportunity to look through their lens at meetings, comparticiones, diálogos, marchas, and other initiatives called by the Zapatistas since 1994. Her photo exhibit is titled Una ventana a la resistencia zapatista, serie de fotografías tomadas entre 1994 y 2024 en diversas comunidades indígenas zapatistas en Chiapas. Well, no further ado, we will start with Professor Marcos, followed by Professor Millán. Just a reminder, each of you have 25 minutes, and I will let you know when your time is up if needed. Thank you so much. Please join me in welcoming them. Professor Marcos, ¿nos
Yes,
escuchan?
is it already time to start? Yes.
¿Nos escuchan?
Sí. ¿Es ya tiempo para comenzar?
Sí, por favor.
Bueno, muchas gracias. I will start sharing. I am going to speak mainly of the participation of women in the Zapatista movement. And I will start sharing 2 examples of my Zapatista experiences. One is 30 years ago. 30 years ago, I was a very young feminist. I had been very activist with women's rights, and we had a lot of urban activism with feminism, and I had no idea of what was happening in Chiapas, except that I find Subcomandanta Ramona sitting in the Cathedral of San Cristobal de las Casas. Imagine, inside the Cathedral of San Cristobal de las Casas in Chiapas, there was this indigenous woman that was called Comandanta Ramona, sitting at the side of the Bishop of San Cristobal, Samuel Ruiz, Don Samuel, and on the other side of Don Samuel was Subcommander Marcos. But the leading voice in this Diálogos de la Catedral was a woman. She was not only a woman, she was an indigenous woman. And she was a poor indigenous woman. And suddenly this woman had this big public space to share her thoughts and her demands. And the movement, the Zapatista movement, had begun the dialogues with our government in Mexico at that time. This is 30 years ago. Imagine, this is what we are now having an anniversary, this moment of el levantamiento zapatista, this moment where Zapatismo became public. Now, I have to say that I had been involved with many, for several years, with local feminist women's groups, very left-oriented, and so I had already heard about this movement that was still not present publicly. But I was very linked to the people that were very close to it. So I already had a previous experience with many of the later known Zapatista leaders or participants in Chiapas. So this is why I say slightly before the Zapatista emerged publicly that I was already linked to it. And I have a very long history in Chiapas since Don Samuel, since 1974, when the first indigenous Congress was organized by Don Samuel, the bishop, in San Cristobal de las Casas. It was the first Congress that was spoken in 4 languages, in the local languages, in Tzotzil, Celtal, Chol, and Tojolabal. So this is my first experience 30 years ago. But now I want to tell you my last experience. My last experience was the 2nd of January of this year, 2024. In El Caracol, Dolores Hidalgo. Now with all this possibility of watching through the screen, I could watch the milicianas, the march of these miliciana women that are the youngest generation of Zapatista participants or Zapatista members or Zapatista activists. And these women were marching very happily and were marching very, very prideful, and they were very happy to share this anniversary. And there were many. I was not present, but I got to see through the screen a lot of what was happening during this anniversary. But the important thing here is that this is 30 years later. And this is the young women that were born within Zapatismo. And these women that were born within Zapatismo were a very particular kind of Mexican woman. Why I say this? I say this because I heard also El Gritón is an urban artist that's part of our collective Camino al Andar. And he just gave a report of his experience in the anniversary. And in this anniversary, he said, I was very surprised of the strength of the young miliciana women. I was surprised because they were standing and marching and participating with such assuredness that I don't see in the Mexican urban women I see. The Mexican urban women today are a little reticent, a little hidden, a little timid, shy, and they don't dare to take their space. And he was comparing with the Zapatista women of today, the milicianas. And I get very emotional with this statement because this Gritón, he's a man, he's an artist, he's not feminist, you know. So why could he remark the difference between urban women today, Mexican, me, and the attitudes, the more positive, more free, more assured, more happy of the milicianas, of the young women in the Zapatista territory. And you know, they were in the Zapatista territory of El Caracol, Dolores Hidalgo. I studied this Caracol, its history, very recently, because I said, what's this Caracol? I had not heard about it. So I found out that before Zapatismo adjuncted this territory, before it took over the territory, it had been tres finqueros that were. Finquero is the owner of the land, the owner of the lands in Chiapas. And a finquero, these finqueros were very violent, and there was a right that the finquero had. Just imagine this. Derecho de pernada. This is 30 years ago, before Zapatismo took over the land. And this 30 years ago, the finquero, the owner of the land, could rape the young women before, in the moment they became young adolescent women. So he had the right to first rape the young women, young women, and this was called derecho de pernada, and this was a right that was still valid some years ago. So imagine the change that Zapatismo, with its political groundbreaking new way of doing a justice struggle, what Zapatismo has brought to women. This is incredible. I mean, you cannot. I remember when I saw little Comandanta Ramona in the cathedral, I was very surprised. I thought, my God, how can an indigenous woman, a poor woman, discriminated against us indigenous, considered inferior and considered atrasada and ignorante by the local Mexican society. And this woman was already starting to do a dialogue with the government of Mexico and with the highest authority of the Catholic Church, the Bishop, Don Samuel. So there is this breakthrough that is due to Zapatismo. And, you know, I went over my books, you know, I have several books, maybe you can see here, this one. Can you see? Can it be activated, the bigger image, please? No, they don't hear me. Okay. So, so I was very surprised by the initial leadership of this Comandante Ramana. Thank you very much. This is one of my books with Zapatista women. It's mainly, all my books are a dialogue with Zapatista women. I take bits and pieces from what they say and what they analyze, and then I say from my point of view as an urban feminist, academic, university woman, I do my reading of what they are saying. But the most important thing is the practical. Let's say, you know, Subcomandante Moises Joseph, just don't come to do theories with us. Just practice with us. And so Submoy was putting an emphasis on the involvement, on the practical involvement, that very often when you are struggling to support a political movement, you get stuck into doing a lot of analysis, a lot of theory on what is happening. And so this practicity is what has come through from Zapatista women. The Zapatista women have made many letters, these positivos, han hablado mucho. I'm sorry, I'm getting in between English and Spanish, and I have to introduce to you that I am going to, I only wanted to do a very short introduction to exemplify the difference between 30 years ago, before Zapatismo, and today, after Zapatismo. Within the area of women's rights, I am not speaking of anything more. I am speaking especially focused on the rights of women. But what I have done is that I am going to read excerpts because I did another book that is very recent, that is this book from which I will be reading to you. I will be reading excerpts. I hope you do understand Spanish. I'm hoping you understand Spanish. I have not translated this book, and I will be dealing also with this book. And this book is my reflections during 30 years talking, being there, being invited, visiting the Zapatistas and participating in multiple festivals and multiple meetings with Zapatistas in their territory. And so I will go now into Spanish with you. I hope you can follow me, and I will get start. I tried to do a little English just so I could connect with those that do not speak Spanish. Okay? So now I will be starting in Spanish. Analizo en este escrito, en este libro, en este librito aquí, en este librito, que es un libro volumen 21 de una colección que se llama Alfaro Zapatista. Apenas acaba de salir de prensa. Es un libro muy poco conocido, pero les recomiendo que lean mi artículo, que ya lo circulé, porque en ese artículo yo recupero mis experiencias con las zapatistas. Y esto, como lo hice apenas a fines del año pasado, a fines del 23, entonces tiene todavía toda una relación muy profunda que he tenido yo con el movimiento zapatista y con las mujeres zapatistas y con su forma de reclamar sus derechos. ¿Por qué es muy importante esto? Porque fíjense, estamos las feministas afuera reclamando nuestros derechos. ¿Y cómo estamos reclamando nuestros derechos? Pues dentro de nuestra tradición, dentro de nuestra filosofía. Una filosofía eminentemente individualista. Es el derecho de la mujer contra el derecho de los hombres. Y entonces, ¿por qué mi derecho como mujer es diferente que el derecho de los hombres? Esa es la lucha que hemos hecho las feministas, 30 años también. Y de todas maneras estamos atrapadas en esa forma de vernos y de concebirnos como sujeto individual. Pero resulta que las zapatistas no se consideran sujeto individual. ¿Por qué? Porque primero que nada pertenecen a culturas que nosotras llamamos genéricamente, las llamamos indígenas, pero indígenas quiere decir Chol, Tocolabal, Tzotzil, Celtal, Zoque, 64 diferentes etnias han sido al mínimo estudiadas por los antropólogos y por los etnógrafos y etnógrafas aquí en el territorio mexicano. Entonces imagínense que si yo digo que nosotras las feministas estamos imponiendo un modo de reclamar nuestros derechos como mujeres, pues lo estamos imponiendo de buena onda, o sea, no somos mala onda, pero estamos formadas en esa forma filosófica de ser individuo, y entonces mi individua mujer no es el individuo hombre. Y sin embargo, de mis estudios, y aquí es donde entra mi trayectoria larga y por qué me interesé yo tanto en el zapatismo, por qué me volví zapatista convencida desde hace 30 años. ¿Por qué? Porque de lo que yo había estudiado en los códices, en los manuscritos antiguos, en todo lo que había quedado del mundo, de los mundos prehispánicos, aún ya recogidos por los frailes colonizadores, había una presencia diversa de la relación hombre-mujer. Esa relación hombre-mujer era otra cosa. ¿Y qué era esa otra cosa? Te los voy a decir rápidamente, pero eso hay que meterle años de análisis. Es la relación hombre-mujer que específicamente nos demostró la comandante Ramona hace 30 años en los diálogos de la catedral con el obispo y con el representante del gobierno de México. Esa era una forma de relación que es complementaria. Yo me he peleado con muchas feministas, muchos años, ya no, porque ya cambió el feminismo. O ya cayeron en la cuenta las feministas más letradas, ya cayeron en la cuenta de que son otros mundos, ¿verdad? Pero yo me he peleado mucho porque la complementariedad parece la sujeción. En las palabras, en los conceptos feministas, complementariedad hombre-mujer quiere decir sujeción de la mujer al hombre. Y sin embargo, en los pueblos indígenas no es eso lo que rige. Lo que rige son espacios separados de lo que se llama el género vernáculo, como lo llama Jan Robert Ivan Illich. El género vernáculo es la forma de relacionarse en las sociedades previas a la llegada de la modernidad. Y en México, en donde hay una modernidad previa, una relación de género previo a la modernidad. Entonces, esto está disperso en los pueblos indígenas. Pero el zapatismo, además de tener esa tradición ancestral de la colectividad primero, como dijo ahora el subcomandante Moisés en este aniversario, el común y lo común, y la tierra no es de nadie, la tierra no se posee. Yo ya había oído eso mucho de los zapatistas, ¿eh? Yo había oído muchas veces decir, la tierra no nos pertenece, nosotros le pertenecemos a la tierra. Pero ahora el sub-Moisés lo toma y lo presenta tajantemente como de esta forma que ya no puede haber otra interpretación. O sea, con lo que nosotros le pertenecemos a la tierra, todavía lo puede uno dejar en una metáfora muy bonita, muy simbólica. Acá el subcomandante Moisés está diciendo, es ahorita, y es aquí, y es ahora. Y es aquí con la gente. Entonces, esta raíz del común es lo que marca al zapatismo y marca a los pueblos indígenas y su relación. Y esta vinculación con el común nos pone a las mujeres en equidad con los varones. No en igualdad, no creo en la igualdad. Nos pone en equidad. ¿En qué, cómo se puede explicar eso? La equidad es esta relación que se vive hoy en el zapatismo, que la vimos con la marcha de las milicianas y los milicianos el 2 de enero, en el Caracol Dolores Hidalgo, que había sido de finqueros violadores de muchachitas jóvenes, que tenían el derecho de violar a las muchachitas. Y de repente este territorio tiene el lugar de estas milicianas libres, felices, cantando, casi bailando la cumbia con la marcha. Entonces, estas manifestaciones realmente nos dicen lo que es el zapatismo. Yo lo diría así. Lo que es el zapatismo para nosotras como mujeres, qué espacio nos da, no solo a las que son zapatistas en el territorio, a todas las mujeres. Y por eso la ley, fíjense lo que es, la ley revolucionaria de mujeres zapatistas emerge del zapatismo en 1993, antes de la emergencia pública. Antes de la emergencia pública ya habían recorrido la comandanta Ramona y la comandanta Susana todas las comunidades zapatistas y habían lo que nosotros llamamos consensado, pero que ellas hablan del acuerdo, un acuerdo con todas las comunidades de la ley revolucionaria de mujeres zapatistas. Pero fíjense la vida que ha tenido esta ley revolucionaria de mujeres zapatistas en nuestro contexto, en el contexto urbano, en el contexto de nuestro gobierno, de las cosas que implementa el gobierno estatal de arriba para abajo, pues que entonces dicen, yo lo digo así, ellos nunca lo dijeron así, yo digo, ay sí, pues el gobierno dijo qué vergüenza, estas indígenas ya están sacando esta ley, están viviendo de acuerdo a la ley. Hay muchos estudios académicos sobre la ley revolucionaria de mujeres zapatistas que data del 93 y ahora últimamente hay muchas especialistas académicas que analizan la ley. Y por eso yo me informo de que, o yo sé que la ley esta se volvió modelo para la igualdad de género o los diferentes gobiernos o los diferentes oficinas de gobierno que tenemos ahora.
Doctora Marcos.
De la mujer. Entonces,
Doctora Marcos, ¿me escucha?
¿dijeron algo?
Sí, ¿me escucha?
Sí, ¿quién es?
Soy Elizabeth, discúlpeme, pero vamos a tener que interrumpir ahí para dar paso a la siguiente ponente, la ponencia de la profesora Magallán. Perdón.
Ya va a empezar. ¿Cuántos minutos me das para cerrar esto?
No, mire, lo que podemos hacer es que vamos a poner todos los enlaces de los libros que nos pasó usted amablemente, los vamos a poner en la internet. Algunos de esos textos ya los leyeron los estudiantes. Y ahorita en la parte de preguntas y respuestas, ahí a lo mejor puede ampliarse un poquito más. Si le parece, y para su conocimiento, parte de la fotografía, de la exposición de fotografía, incluye la Ley Revolucionaria de las Mujeres. Entonces, ahorita, si nos permite, pasamos con la doctora Millán y volvemos con usted en un ratito, ¿sí?
Ahorita, a ver, ahorita yo ya no puedo cerrar lo que estoy diciendo.
Sí.
No voy a tardarme mucho, dame 3 minutos.
3 minutos, perfecto.
¿Sí?
Perfecto, adelante.
Nada más para acabar la idea. Entonces, lo que yo estaba diciendo es cómo el zapatismo en su relación con las mujeres ha logrado esta ley, pero no solo el zapatismo que se quedó con las mujeres zapatistas, sino que estas tomas de decisión del zapatismo o estos avances feministas, podríamos llamarlos, del zapatismo, tuvieron un impacto en la forma como se maneja el gobierno, los gobiernos estatales con los derechos de las mujeres. Esto es muy importante porque lo que es importante entender del zapatismo y que yo quiero que quede muy claro y muy fuerte es las influencias que ha dejado en la sociedad contemporánea, en la forma de gobierno contemporáneo, en el modo de concebir los derechos de las mujeres y sobre todo los derechos de los pueblos indígenas. Entonces, de pronto, el zapatismo irrumpe, parece que es una cuestión de pueblos indígenas y de repente, a lo largo de 30 años, nos damos cuenta que vino a traer una lección, a dar una lección de avance en los derechos de los pueblos y en los derechos de las mujeres. Y que no se ha quedado aislado, que no es cierto que está ya por allá en Chiapas en un territorio aislado. No es cierto. Desde ese territorio y de ese pensamiento anclado en esas tradiciones ancestrales del género vernáculo, de ese territorio han salido una serie de influencias que impactan ahora nuestra sociedad. El Estado no permite mucho, ¿eh? Aquí las contemporáneos, si yo doy una evaluación contemporánea, yo diría, pues es un 10% de lo que han logrado las zapatistas adentro de su territorio. ¿No? Cómo el zapatismo anuló muchas sujeciones y muchas discriminaciones hacia las mujeres y hacia nuestro poder. Y bueno, ya con eso, si quieres ya, Elizabeth, no sé dónde estás, no te veo, quisiera verte. Porque tú me ves, pero yo no te veo.
Nosotros también quisiéramos tenerla aquí, doctora Marcos. Muchas gracias. Ahorita volvemos con usted. Gracias. ¿Te quieres parar?
No, ¿me tengo que parar? ¿Quieres que me pare?
No sé, pregúntale a Moni, por favor. Gracias. What did you do?
What do I do?
Here's one.
I stand.
Yeah, I think that's where the camera is.
I move.
That's okay.
I want to say hello to Sylvia. Sylvia, do you hear me?
¿Cómo?
Do you hear me?
Sí, sí, te oigo, Margara.
Bueno, estoy muy encantada de estar aquí contigo, aunque sea a la distancia. So I'm going to thank Elizabeth for this invitation. Also,
No creí
Dr.
que se iba a
Hoyos.
lograr, Margara.
No, pero ya estamos aquí juntas. So Sylvia and I, we participate together in a group. The name of the group is Decolonial Feminisms, Network of Decolonial Feminisms. And I have to share that she invited us in year 2008 to a bunch of people that we are together now because of the impact, as she says, of the movement in our own worldview, I think. So I'm going just to make a short account of 40, 30 years of the Zapatista movement. I will start telling that the Zapatista movement is well known internationally as one of the most creative of contemporary anti-neoliberal, anti-capitalist movements. One of its characteristic elements since its inception has been the presence and participation of women, of indigenous women. It is not easy to talk about 40 and 30 years of the incursion of the guerrilla group in the southeast of Mexico and 30 years since the indigenous uprising. There has been many moments, experiences, and emphases of this struggle. So I would just want to go around a little bit. I think what Zapatista movement is doing in the world is decolonizing politics, decolonizing epistemics, and refreshing and relaunching the critique of modernity. So this process is about creating a new language and also about putting in the center new narratives of what do we understand about actual living together. So at the core of the Zapatista movement, as a local movement, we must refer to these four paths. The first one is the long tradition of peasant organization in the south of Mexico, the agrarian movement. So we have the campesinos and indigenous together, 60s and 80s. The Indian theology, as it's named by Archbishop Samuel Ruiz, which Sylvia just recalled, that has also a long and strong tradition from Colombia also, no? This kind of thinking about making reality the things that we think the best world, the best possible world, no? I have to point out that in this, in the south of Mexico, in this San Cristobal de las Casas, we had a very strong feminist woman, ecclesiastic feminist woman. This is also important to understand the worldview of the Zapatista women and also men. So the Coordinadora Diocesana de Mujeres were very strong. It was very strong there. Then we have the left Maoist groups of urban mestizo activist intellectual revolutionaries that we know they came in the 80s, because as you know, Mexico was a very strong, soft dictatorial rule, no? The PRI had 70 years in power, and it was a strong repression for all of the political alternatives. So we had guerrilla movements in the urban, and we know that they went in the 80s over there. And we have also the ancestral culture, which Sylvia just referred, the communal way of living and caring. So this is at the core of a movement that after that turned a global movement. We have also to think about what was happening in the 90s. we have la caída del muro de Berlín, so the end of the real socialist, how do you say, el socialismo realmente existente, no? We have this like breaking all the horizon of changing the world, the capitalist world. And we have also in Mexico what we have with the US and Canada, the Tratado de Libre Comercio. In the year 92, we here in the year 92, we just assist in Chiapas, in San Cristóbal de las Casas, to this is Diego de Mazariegos. This is the 12th of October of 92. And surprisingly, many people came together and just turned down the statue. So this was also this was already the Zapatista movement. We didn't know them. It was like a silent rebellion, decolonizing rebellion. No. So I will pass very, very quickly through some kind of moments of the movement. So I think the first one from... ¿Podemos quitar esto de aquí abajo? From the 90s to the year 2003. Gracias. We have like the first intention of Zapatista movement that was refounding the national state. So it was a big movement to make another constitution, another Mexican constitution. And what they used to do for that was to revise a kind of revisit of the Mexican Revolution. So what they founded a lot of spaces, the name were Aguascalientes, and they also liberate some municipios, some kind of tierras, and the path of that was to transform the state. So the 90s then, the awakening of the Zapatista was dismantling the single history that the industrialized West want to impose on humanity, but doing it first with the Mexican national state, okay? So they focus to the nation, they talk to the state, they went to the Congress, and they wanted to do another thing. Mares is the municipios autónomos rebeldes de Zapatistas. As many of you must know, this intention concretized in the Acuerdos de San Andrés, that is like another kind of constitution. Plurality is recognized. The autonomous political subject of indigenous people is recognized. And many other single questions that we are going to analyze about women. But this was not possible because even though the state and all the political forces in that moment signed these Acuerdos de San Andrés, they didn't pass in the Congress. So the second moment of the Zapatista movement is turned towards themselves, the autonomy path. So is the Caracoles, that maybe you also know about them. Caracoles is like a big center of collective culture, politics, justice, everything. Caracoles represent a region. And in Caracoles, we understand that the Zapatistas formate themselves. Political formation is done there, education, also health, and las juntas de buen gobierno, so the justice is also created and supported over there. So we are talking about 2003 until now. The Zapatista, the Caracoles is the form of the Zapatista politicity and kind of presentation to the world. So we have another moment from 2020. Remember, we were in the pandemic. We were very scared. We were in confinement. We were like stopping to do whatever we were doing. And Zapatistas were creating more caracoles. They passed from 5 to 12. But they were also thinking about making a bigger intervention in the world. No? So they were thinking about La Travesía por la Vida. Maybe some of you knew about this. You know about this. These are el Escuadrón 423, perdón, 421, that we have 4 women, 2 men, and 1 otro. So this also reflects the way Zapatismo now is in dialogue with all diversity, identity diversity, sexual diversity, but also positioning the woman, the weight of the woman there. So 42-1 represent that. And as you may know, they went from Veracruz to Europe. No? They were doing this in 2 ways. One of it was this is a little ship, very old, that just went by 45 days, I think, to reach Spain. And the other part of the committee was flying. And maybe this is a good anecdote that we should share, that when they wanted to, this was the Zapatistas and the Congreso Nacional Indígena, because we must say that Congreso Nacional Indígena is founded in 96. So 94 is the year of rising, 96, Congreso Nacional Indígena is like the way other communities in Mexico are taking Zapatismo for developing in their communities. No? It's a strong movement of indigenous people in Mexico. So the anecdote I wanted to tell you is that when they wanted to travel, they went to ask for their passport, but many of them didn't have papers. So they were said extemporáneos. They were called extemporáneos. I don't know if you can understand this word, extemporáneo. No? So they used to talk about them like something that is extemporáneo. And I think this is nice to think about, no? Extemporáneo regarding what? So regarding the rules of modernity that recognize the rules of the state, that recognize you. And yes, they are a extemporaneity for our time, the Zapatistas. And this is the movement, the time that Sylvia was also referring. 2024, we just came, the photographers here, Yuridia and myself, went to this celebration of the 30 years of Zapatismo in Caracol, Dolores Hidalgo. And here we can share the new aspect of the Zapatismo proposal. And here is very interesting because you see the Zapatistas always make the history of themselves. They make memory of where do they come from and what they want in the future. So here we can see all the finca, las fincas, the clandestine movement, the period of the preparation, also with arms and formation, political formation. The autonomy here, we have to say, they try to modify the state, but this can't be done. Maybe it can be done. I don't know, this is a question. Then autonomy, and now the common work and the new structure. So what about women in all this perspective? So we know that some compañeras arrived in Chiapas canyons in the first moment with the guerrillas. We also know that the subordination of women in the guerrilla struggles was already being questioned in the 80s. And that the cultural clash with the indigenous world provoked a questioning of many of the leftist assumptions and of the feminist assumptions, as Sylvia just posed. So just as the criticism of developmentalism was clear, the centrality of women's role in community life began to be valued. Without women, this process, the Zapatista process, would be impossible. As an integral and radical transformation of the world. And if Zapatismo fought for the recognition of the indigenous political subject, it had to recognize the autonomy and generative forces of the feminine. In what follows, I will try to give you some perspective about the development of the woman within the Zapatista movement. So the first one, it was already called by Sylvia, the revolutionary law. I will just say this law exactly it was part of the revolutionary laws. There were many of them about the work, about the labor, about justice. A lot of them, they were published in 93, in December 93, in a little booklet. The name is El Despertador Mexicano. That was the name of the political publication. So the law included this. Today we say enough, and this was the part of the Zapatistas' women law. So Marcos will tell us about that in March 93, we were discussing what would later become the revolutionary laws. Susana has the job of visiting dozens of communities to talk to women's groups and gather the content for the women's law. When the CRI is the Comité Revolucionario Clandestino Indígena, met to vote the passing of the laws, the commissions passed on the front one by one. The Justice Commission, the Agrarian Law Commission, the War Taxes Commission, the Rights and Responsibilities Commission, and the Women's Commission. Susana had to read out the proposal she had written from the thoughts of thousands of indigenous women. She began to read, and as she read, the CRI Assembly grew restless. Voices whispers in Chol, Setzal, Tzotzil, Tojolabal, Man, Soque, and Castilla. Comments flew from one end to the other. Susana did not falter. She went on, tearing down everything and everybody. We don't want to be made to marry someone we don't want. We want to have the number of children we decide we can raise. We want the right to hold posts in the community. We want the right to speak and have our words respected. We want the right to go to school, and she continued until she was finished. There was a heavy silence. The women's revolutionary law that Susana had just read meant a real revolution for indigenous communities. The men looked to one another, nervous, restless. Suddenly, all at the time, the translators finished, and in a gradually increasing movement, women began to clap and speak between them. It goes without mention that the law was unanimously approved. Some Celtal representative commented, "Thankfully, my wife doesn't understand Spanish." And a revolutionary official, a woman infantry major, exploded. "You're fucked. because we're going to translate it to every of our languages. The representative lowered his gaze. So this is like the anecdote of what was happening there. And this is very impressive, no? The presence of women and the takeover of the woman, of what Zapatismo wanted. So I want just to pass by. 94, we met the insurgentas. You know who were the insurgentas? The women that were in the ZLN, in the army. They were trained in a military way, and they took over San Cristobal de las Casas in 94 with other men. So we have 4 or 5 recognized women that were there in the site, and we have some of the testimonies. I'm just going to read very quickly one of April 4, 94. Maria Elena, this is commented by La Jornada, periódico La Jornada. The reporter is Herman Bellinghausen, and this is what he says. Maria Elena can speak Celtal, although she is a Chol, and she is old. The women of the ZLN are educated and healthy. They have led for years a Spartan life, but have had regular meals and healthcare. Like Amalia, Maria Elena thinks she is better off than if she had stayed in her town. Had she stayed, she would be like those sad mothers, barefoot, thin, surrounded by sicky children. Any mother older than 20 has lost 1 or more children already, and speaks with a fixed sadness that Maria Elena doesn't have. In her conversation, there is no fatalism or ideological stiffness. She speaks without pretension, but when asked specifically, the answers that she fights so people can live better. Dying in battle does not worry her. And she already had a close encounter on January the 2nd. Today makes 3 months of borrowed life. So we have another instance that are the comandantes. So the comandantes are these, well, the most famous is the Comandanta Ramona. Sylvia just, she knows her. She was telling us how little she is. She was. And we can see here that was true. And we can see her in all the first discussions and political meetings with the government from 94 until 96, 97. She was a very, very impressive woman. It would be Ramona. I will tell you another anecdote. You know, Mexican University is a public university. It's a very big university, but we don't have indigenous people. And we don't learn indigenous languages. And in the year 97, in March 8, we had what I call a lesson about language. There is also a lesson about culture. It was a celebration of the International Women's Day. Comandanta Ramona was there. She was the main speaker. For almost 1 hour, Ramona spoke before a large, attentive, silent audience. This was in the center of the campus. Very big space, many people will work. She speaks in her own language without stopping. And even though not more than a handful can understand her, I think maybe nobody, the audience remains silent and listens to the rhythmical sounds of the Comandanta Tzotzil, listening without understanding the exact meaning, but feeling the communicative action, the strength of her presence, and at the same time, the strangeness of her language. I just want to transmit you this scene. no? If you want to know more about Comandante Ramona, in this link, you will have, and there are many interviews, but this one especially is very, very interesting. And here we have she died in 2006 in Mexico City. So the next Comandante I want to bring here is Comandante Esther. Comandante Esther representing Zapatismo at the heart of the national's political space, the Congress. To put the relevance of this event in context, in symbolical terms, the presence of the indigenous represented by Esther at the Congress could be compared to the eruption of the peasant armies into the capital during the Mexican Revolution. This is why it was so hotly debated whether the ZLN could or could not enter to the House of Commons. We should not forget that Mexico was undergoing its transformation into a real democracy, 2001. This was the first year the PRI was derrotado, no? The electoral triumph for the National Action Party. President Fox, that he said, I will solve the problem in 15 minutes. The Chiapas problem, I will solve it in 15 minutes. So I just want to read a little bit, or maybe you read, of what she's saying. No? You know, in the revolutionary women's law, we understand a political subject, the woman, talking at least to 4 entities: the nation state, the dominant class, their own community, the patriarchal ways of their own community, but also the ZLN, their organization. No? And here Esther is doing something analog in the way she's speaking. She's standing there, she says, it doesn't matter what's my name. In another terms, she says, I'm a indigenous woman, I'm Mexican, and I'm Zapatista, no? And she's very conscious of what it means for the movement to be her, and not Subcomandante Marcos, that everybody was just waiting for him, no? But it was her who was delivering the central message. I really invite you to revise this message. You can look at it in Enlace Zapatista, and you have it there in English also. So you can see what she's asking. And this is like the top of this first wave, no? We want to change the state. We want to be part of the nation. We want to Indianize Mexico, no? We want to make another thing of the state. Well, this image, I bring it because for me it's very, very important. I want to bring here this image which will go around the world. Maybe some of you know it before. No? Yes? This is January 1996. Soyep, Chiapas. This is the moment where, after the dialogue of peace and reconstitution, Presidente Cedillo decides whether he's going to hunt Marcos and all the rebels, and the army entered again the communities, and this is one of the moments they just found the power of the woman. This is Pedro Valtierra's photographs, and there we can see the woman forming a human barrier to stop the troops. A journalist, Luis Hernandez Navarro, recently has just pointed out this photo. because in Mexico and maybe in other parts of the world, we are like talking a lot about these 30 years. So we see here the feminine force of resistance, the defense of the territory. The women commanders, for their part, refer us to another instance, the political leadership of indigenous women. So I'm trying to let you see these dimensions of this political subject. Women, the women. Who are these women? There are many kinds of it, no? These are women of communities. They are what we call la base, Zapatista, no? But we have also the commanders, and we have also the insurgentes. And to finish, where are these women now? All of these women, these are photographs of Yuridia. They grew in the Zapatista world. They were born in the Zapatista law, in that horizon of changing the world. So what they did in this celebration, and I'm sorry, I would love to have here the video because the video is incredible, but maybe you can look it. On the 31st of December, the military performance, no? Like the, ¿cómo se dice? La ceremonia militar.
Parade, or military
The
parade.
military parade, no? We were expecting. Was a formation of men and women, young men and young women, and the sound of a cumbia. The name of the cumbia is 17 años, of this group that, what's the name of the group, Judy?
Los Ángeles Azules.
Los Ángeles Azules. Please listen to this. And we saw like they were coming together. They are unarmed. They just have the toilets and they are making like the rhythm with the music. And they come together. And then women break the lines, no? And with another kind of music, this ska, of a very nice group named Pantheon Rococo, that is talking about let's change everything. They are just dancing, and they are just like performing a kind of feminine liberty that we don't know yet. So I think I want you to look to this both kind of gaze. I think the gaze is very important. This is the first thing that shocks you when you go there and see them. So how they can be changing and stirring you also, like questioning, what are you going to do to don't permit the end of the world? Maybe some of you know that in 2018, the Zapatista women called for a massive encounter. The name of the encounter is very interesting now. So this is the first international encounter, politic, artistic, deportive, and cultural of the women that fight. So this is the turn they do with a feminist woman, no? They want us to define in a common ground. And this common ground is, what are you fighting? And why are you fighting? No? So this is, and I love this football scene of the Zapatistas also. And this is 9,000 women of all over the world gathered in this long space, I mean, in the territory of Caracol, Morelia. And that's it.
All right, thank you very much. We have time for questions, comments, reactions. As a literary scholar, I pay attention to the force of the signifier. How words sometimes travel. And I just wanted to point out, because it's kind of fascinating, that the word caracol,
Yes.
in Chile, evokes the 1990s success of neoliberalism, because the first malls in Santiago de Chile are Los Caracoles. If you can picture that, so these circular structures where people would go and browse and shop. So what a decade, right? The 90s, 2000s, where Caracol could mean something so different in different contexts. So I was, just wanted to share that. In terms, of course, of questions, I'd love to hear more about extemporaneity, right? That point that you made, Margara, about los extemporáneos and the legal figure of a passport, right, given to people out of time. I'm thinking of Johannes Fabian and the denial of coevalness, the problem of whether we can be coeval with Zapatismo now, or with the memory of Zapatismo 30 years ago. So that's, just adding a log to the fire here in case people would want to pick that up. But I'm happy also to gather questions, especially from our MA students. No question is too big or too small. The floor is open.
So thank you so much, both of you, for coming. That was so beautiful. Oh yes, I'm a master's student here in Latin American Studies. So a question I have is regarding like young women and basically girls in the Zapatista movement. How are they participating, or how is this message being given to young girls and women?
If we
I
take
do
one more
not
question,
hear
just
the question. Hello? I do not hear the question. Can I get a higher?
Sí, déjame un segundo, tomamos una pregunta más y las repetimos para que puedas escucharlas. Silvia, ¿me escuchas?
Sí, ya te escucho. A ti sí
Ok,
te.
muy bien, dame un segundo y ya repetimos las preguntas, ¿vale?
Bueno.
Like in many other Latin American countries, the Zapatist movements are often portrayed by the government as terrorists right now. So is Zapatista, like how does the government, Mexico government itself, portray Zapatista right now? And does it still think it is a terrorist? And if not, how do they like balance the different rhetorics?
Silvia, voy a repetir dos de las preguntas. Una es sobre el problema del terrorismo, de denominar los movimientos revolucionarios, populares o guerrilleros como terroristas, y el otro es sobre el papel de las mujeres más jóvenes en el zapatismo hoy. Eso por hacer algunas preguntas, y aquí me imagino que también Margara va a contestar algunas, a lo mejor Yuridia se anima a contestar las otras, y tú también, Silvia, en Ciudad de México. Por favor.
Muy bien, gracias.
Sí, por favor.
Silvia, contesto yo primero.
Sí, contesto.
So about young women, Zapatistas is a communitarian movement, no? So they are in the communities. The communities are not unified. Not everybody is Zapatista. But what do they do a lot is they have like obras de teatro. A lot of them, just to have the memory of the struggle and how people can participate in it. So, for example, in this anniversary, all of the first day was to do this play. And I think from kids to young girls, boys and girls, that's how they understand what the movement is about. They know how it was before and what do they have now. So we have been in some kind of testimonial acts of young women. I remember one very important one, when a young woman about 16, 17 years, he was telling that she was pity for those who were not Zapatistas, because maybe they have a lot of more things, like nice shoes, high shoes, and other things, but they don't have identity, and they don't have history. So I think that's the way they are participating, the young women. And also, Zapatismo opens, as you can see in the revolutionary law, a big space of more freedom for the women. No, they can choose when they marry, who they marry. No, so because it's not like that in customary way of life, no practical way of life. And about the terrorism, when the states sit to dialogue with the indigenous woman, then they couldn't make the rhetoric of terrorism anymore. You understand me? This was like a break of this kind of rhetoric. No? The state knows they owe something. They have a debt to the indigenous people. And they recognize them as part of the nation. So there's no way they can go and say they are terrorists. No more. This is a special thing, no? Because now all over the world, everyone who protests is a terrorist. If you wear this, you're a terrorist, no? Etc.
Doctora Marcos, would you like to add?
A ver, oí bien, escuché bien que quieren saber sobre las jóvenes.
Sí, así
Quería
es.
saber una de ellas, ¿no?
Sí.
¿Qué papel juegan las jóvenes? ¿Sí preguntaron eso? ¿Sí?
Sí, así es.
No, pues exactamente era lo que yo traté de explicar, pero pues yo hablo en español, ¿verdad? Ese es el problema. Voy a tener que tratar mi inglés, aunque no sea muy bueno. La gran diferencia entre las jóvenes zapatistas y las jóvenes afuera del zapatismo es enorme. It's a huge difference between women Zapatistas, 16, 17 years old, or the milicianas that were marching, and the women outside Zapatismo, Mexican women, young women outside Zapatismo are all worried about how to dress, how to buy the last fashion, how to do, how they are going to have a good position in society or find a rich husband to marry or something like this is very often the worry of the young Mexican women. And the Zapatista women are committed to their political struggle. And they are young also, but they are much more philosophically developed, I should say, more, not only politically, but philosophically, they are more mature. And then
Thank you very much.
About terrorismo. About
Sí.
terrorismo or why, a ver, there is something very complicated now. Huh? Terrorismo, according to what I heard, they were asking a question about calling Zapatismo a terrorist movement. Yes or no? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I just want to be sure I heard it right. because we are at this moment, the world over, full of terrorist movements. And Zapatismo has been called probably by power, dominant power everywhere as a terrorist organization. But imagine they have never attacked. They are a peaceful movement. This is what's the most amazing thing about Zapatismo, is that they struggle without responding to violence they suffer. They get attacked, they go beyond their place, they leave their belongings, leave their houses, leave everything, but they will not respond attacking. And this is what is very important to recuperate. It is a justice movement that has made a commitment to peace. From them, their response is always peaceful. And this is something that has been very distorted in the news. Huh? The news are distorting completely what type of political movement it is Zapatismo.
Muchas gracias. Son las 3 de la tarde, it's 3 p.m. I'd like to make time for maybe one last round of questions from our master students, from others in the audience, from colleagues, and then we'll adjourn to make time to experience the beautiful photographic exhibition that we have prepared here in Casa Bolívar. Any last thoughts or questions? Oh, you got it.
Hi, thank you very much. Muchas gracias. I'm Michael Wolf, professor of history here, associate professor, sorry. So what I find so interesting about this is that the Zapatista movement has passed into history already. You're talking about 30 years. But when it broke out into the scene in 1994, what was really llamó la atención, right? Really raised attention was the fact that it was trying to revive the original Zapata of the 1910s, right? It was really a neo-Zapatista movement. And unlike Zapata in the 1910s, it spoke openly of indigenous rights, women's rights, as you said. Zapata never spoke of those things. If you look at his Plan de Ayala, nothing about indigenous rights. I mean, he himself partly identified, but there wasn't that kind of identification. And so now, 30 years later, after 1994, what is the relationship of the Zapatista movement to that original one of Zapatismo from the 1910s, about how it remembers that? I'm just curious. I speak as a historian.
Yes. Could we take one more question just in case we want to? Okay.
Can I ask? So the opposite question to me, guys. I'm Alberto, I'm a political scientist. So I'm very puzzled after the pandemic, or during the pandemic, after the pandemic, with all this ferment of political organization of the caracoles and the juntas de buen gobierno. I haven't been able even to understand exactly what has happened there, but the caracoles have been transformed. There was this expansion of caracoles, then transformation into juntas de buen gobierno, that my understanding is they become really very autonomous, but very fragmented, very, like each locality is going to have their own rule in many ways. And I was wondering whether you can explain to us a little bit what is going on, because they are innovating in terms of political structure, political organization, but at least scholars on this end of the country, we're not understanding what's happening.
So let me paraphrase for Sylvia. Sylvia, hay una pregunta sobre el zapatismo original de 1910, del Plan de Ayala, su relación con el presente.
Es muy interesante.
Y otra pregunta.
Muy interesante, porque el zapatismo original del estado de Morelos era un zapatismo también colectivista. El Plan de Ayala, el documento que salió del zapatismo morelense, que es otro movimiento, es un Plan de Ayala de sujeto colectivo, no de sujeto individual. Entonces, hay muchos vínculos. Yo considero muchos vínculos, aunque ha habido John Womack que estudió el zapatismo de Morelos y hay un historiador contemporáneo que está cuestionando mucho las interpretaciones que hizo John Womack, porque él trajo el mundo moderno en su historia y interpretó el zapatismo morelense desde su punto de vista de él como un norteamericano muy interesado y muy comprometido. Estuvo acá en Morelos, en Cuernavaca, o sea, era un personaje local. Entonces, este historiador contemporáneo Avilés está cuestionando mucho las posturas de John Womack sobre el zapatismo. Y lo que yo puedo decir era colectivista, era sujeto colectivo y era comunitario, totalmente comunitario. Y todavía tenemos sobrevivencia de ese zapatismo morelense aquí en Morelos, ¿eh? En los pueblos emerge la colectividad zapatista, pero espontáneamente. Esa
Muchas
era
gracias.
nada más la comparación, ¿verdad?
Sí, voy a hablar un poquito también de eso, Silvia. So you remember that I presented like 4 paths of the Zapatista contemporary movement. We also call it Neozapatismo at the beginning, but I think that we have to understand the different paths that were like in a laboratory in scene when this uprised, no? So in my way of view, it's like an actualization of what the Zapatismo historically mean now, with all other kind of otras posturas sobre igualdad, ¿no? La cuestión de las mujeres, la cuestión de la diversidad sexual, se han incorporado todo esto, ¿no? Y creo que lo han hecho porque están como en una frontera, ¿no? Donde todo sucede. We have to consider that from the 94 until now, Zapatismo, the local Zapatismo, the space, the geographical space, has become like a cosmopolitan way of dialogue with many other movements. And for example, the Kurdish women were there since year 2015. No, very, very active. So this is what is going on with but I think that the main demand of the original Zapatismo, tierra y libertad, I think it's recuperated by the Zapatistas. But tierra without property, and this is what you were pointing out, because caracoles and juntas de buen gobierno appeared in the year 2003, and in 2024, the juntas de buen gobierno, that was like the structure of justice and political decisions, they ended. So this is the transformation. We are very curious as you to see what happened, no? The caracoles are remaining like a space because they have schools, they have auditoriums, they gather together in the caracoles. So caracoles are remaining, and there are 12. But the political structure is more in the basement. So now they are talking about the GALs, the autonomous community government. Then they will go to the regional representatives of the communities, and they will decide there, no more junta de buen gobierno. And how they pointed out in this obras de teatro that we just saw, so the juntas de buen gobierno se convirtieron en una pirámide. Ajá. Entonces tiraron la pirámide. you know? So that's what we are going in now. Very, very interesting. I mean, if you study like the radical democracy, I think this is a kind of looking at.
So in closing, I'd like to, point out the interdisciplinary nature of our gathering, to have a historian's perspective, a political scientist perspective, photography, ethnography. This is, I think, what the Center for Latin American Studies is all about, and especially to the benefit of our master's students as they chart their way across the disciplines. I would like to thank our speakers from the bottom of my heart. We've learned so much from you, and we appreciate your being with us on Zoom, in person. I'd like to thank Elizabeth, Megan, Sarah, who's not with us today, and Auril for all of your efforts. I've seen, how much of a production this has all been until very recently, with Exacto knives flying here and there to make the photographic exhibition possible. So with that, sí. ¿Te dije Megan? ¿Te rebauticé?
Sí. Y Sophie, tienes que mencionar a Sophie.
Y Sophie.
Sí.
And thank you, gracias
Me salvó
a Sophie.
Sí.
Muy importante. Muchas gracias.